And we are back with more on News Talk Saga 960. So very glad that you could join us on this edition of the Marc Patrone Show. Well, this whole episode revolving around Alec Baldwin, the shooting of two people, one of whom died in that shooting. It was on set of a movie called Rust in New Mexico. Still a lot of buzz about what went on, who might be responsible. There's a bit of finger pointing going on. Well, now with Alec Baldwin, who was holding the gun at the time when it went off, struck the director as well as the cinematographer. The cinematographer, a lady, was killed, and Hollywood still trying to grapple with what happened. And so it really is great that we're able to bring along Daniel Levinson, who's a certified flight director and choreographer and a gun wrangler. So he knows what's going on the set. He knows the proper way in which to manage these props and how not to do it. And that's why it gives me great pleasure to bring Daniel in to talk about this. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Just one correction.
Okay.
Flight director, not flight.
What did I say? Flight director?
People will think I can book them to excellent trips around the world. And no, my focus is on the illusion of combat in film and theater.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, my friend. Your brother was a guy that I know, and he's a great guy, but he sent me a note, and actually he did spell it correctly. I read it incorrectly. It's fight director. It's a fight director and a choreographer.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for correcting me on that. You're a fight director and a gun wrangler. Okay, so tell me, what is your take on? I mean, it's been a few days now since this happened, and have you had a chance maybe to look back and go, well, this is probably what happened. These are the people, or this is the person who should bear at least part of the blame. Perhaps Baldwin himself should bear part of the blame. What's your take on this, and how can we learn from this incident?
Well, first of all, my heart sunk once I heard about it. What I know about it, of course, is pretty much what I think both you and all your listeners know from what they have read. And no surprise, there was material coming out and information coming out bit by bit. And once it seemed clear that an actual live round was put into the firearm that was being used on set, that was really where I felt just appalled. I'm not a lawyer, and of course I wasn't working on the set, so I'm going to be careful what I say, because I've no doubt even more information will come out later as more investigation goes into it. But I can speak first of all about being Canadian and in Canada. We would simply never, ever have live rounds on a set. It's just impossible, because the danger is too high and there's no need for it. We make use of blanks when trying to create the illusion of gunfire. And we have something called dummy bullets, which are basically the illusion of bullets, but they don't have powder. They don't have primer, which ignites the powder. They're simply there to create the look so that if you're loading a firearm on screen, we can see it, and it's believable. So that's the first really huge red flag. And since first hearing about that, I also heard that they were doing it for fun, like they were plinking. They were shooting cans for fun, and it's so outside my experience of reasonable behavior, because of how careful we have to be with firearms when performing for the safety of the actors, the safety of the crew members, in live theater, the safety of the audience, right? And in Canada, if you're going to be using a firearm for target shooting or for hunting, there's really hard rules that we follow as well. You don't aim a firearm ever at a human being or at anything you don't want to destroy, which sounds over the top, but it's true. We really are hyper aware and careful of what's behind the target, of what we look like we're aiming at. And so this entire part of the narrative is super upsetting. And that tells me that likely the armorer bears a lot of responsibility, because the armorer is the person who decides which firearms, well, with the company. But the armor brings in the firearms, is the one who shows the performers that they're either loaded or unloaded and that they're safe, and they proof. It's an action of going through the fire, making sure that there's no way for it to go off. So there's a lot of responsibility on the armor. The AD, apparently, who gave the actual gun to Alec Baldwin, of course, really shouldn't have been the person doing that. That's the armorer's job. And the fact that, to my understanding, the claim is that said that the firearm was unloaded and safe without checking it or not knowing is completely irresponsible. And finally, with Alec Baldwin himself, there is the aspect of the gun being in his hand, and that's extremely troubling. Him believing that the firearm was empty could be used as an argument, but the way we, or at least I do on my film sets, is that I would have shown the actor the reality of if the firearm was loaded or not before handing it to them. And finally, he's the producer, so I have little doubt that the buck stops with him, and there'll be questions as to why he hired the people he hired. It always seems to come back to, as we were talking about earlier before we started the recording, it comes back to money often, and how people wish to spend money and how people want to save money. And my argument would be that you can't cut corners, and you can't play financial games with people's lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. The armorer was on the set of another Western a couple of months earlier. This is the story I saw. And the actor at the time, Nicolas Cage, had an incident. At least it was reported by somebody on the set that the gun went off, and it was so loud that he yelled at her and said, "You just blew my effing ears off," something to that effect. And so that was a bit of a red flag there. And on the set of that movie, what happened later on was that the producer said, "Well, we never heard about that incident." So clearly there's a lot of butt covering going on here, because if in fact that incident was real and really did happen, then the producer of that show should have raised some red flags with this individual, that maybe she was not as qualified as she could have been. Did you hear of that incident prior?
I did, and one of the things that is super important to talk about is it's not just a question of physical injury through hot gases of a fired blank, because in the case of Rust, the movie we're talking about, it was a revolver, so chances are the hot gases also come out the side of the firearm because it's a revolver and it's not sealed like a contemporary pistol. So that's all really important. On top of it is also the question of hearing loss and the danger to hearing, because the decibels of a gunshot are very high. And so firing the gun without warning people so that they could have proper hearing protection from people off camera, we put hearing protectors on that they wear, and people on camera have hidden ones inside their ear. Like, this is super important. So a gun going off without expectation for people around can be really upsetting, really frightening, and harmful. So I'm not surprised that Nicolas Cage, if that happened, was very upset.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't heard from Cage himself. This is just the account of somebody who claims that this incident happened, is that Cage stormed off the set and had complained about the incident. This lady, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, I believe she's a 24-year-old, and she seems to be at the center of this. Is it your understanding that Baldwin is kind of blaming her for what happened with the shooting?
Well, from what I've been reading again, and we have to be careful here because there's a lot of let's call it color coming from who's writing the report and how it's the words being chosen. But at present, it sounds to me like there is a lot of questioning on the behavior of the AD, the first AD, as well as the armorer. And as I said earlier, the fact that there was live ammo on the set really points a finger at a lack of thinking, and the danger, which obviously happened, of mixing this in with blanks or dummy bullets is simply, it can't be overstated. So I wouldn't be surprised if she is certainly being painted as one of the villains of the piece, because I think that she has a lot of responsibility and probably needs to answer for a lot of what happened.
How about Baldwin himself? I mean, he had the gun in his hand when it, I guess you could say, he either fired it or it went off or something happened. We don't exactly know, but I mean, is it safe to say he should not have been pointing it at anybody, whether he thought it was?
Yes, and I have to agree. Now, here's the challenge about the information, because I've heard conflicting reports. One was that the intended moment to be filmed was him drawing the revolver and while sitting in a pew in a church and firing it into camera, and that can all be done effectively and safely. If the crew is not behind the camera at the time, they usually put a plexiglass protector up to protect the lens of the camera. But otherwise, the camera operator and the director are all watching it from another location on a screen. And so the idea of using this as a filmed moment is not unbelievable at all. The issue and the question is, what were they doing there? If they were prepping the shot, and meaning the filmed moment, not the gunshot, and they were deciding on angle and thing, and therefore we're looking through camera together, would explain why they're there. In that case, why is the loaded gun in the event? If they wanted to see the action, they can obviously quickly use a double that isn't loaded, or just a rubber copy, or what have you. The issue is that we had a loaded gun put in that position. Now, again, Alec Baldwin being told that it wasn't loaded, and I have no doubt he'll lean on that as saying, I trusted the people I hired, and so this is where the minutia in between I have no doubt will happen in court and go between the lawyers. But you can see how many stages needed to go wrong for such a tragedy to happen, and how unnecessary it would have been. The other thing about it is, if the firearm is an older style revolver, meaning a Colt style single action revolver, that's often the gun that's used in cowboy style movies, you need to cock the gun by pulling the hammer back, not just a little bit, a long way, and pull the trigger. And so guns accidentally going off while in the hand aren't as common as people may say, right? And so this tells me that for the firearm to go off the way it did, all the gestures needed to cause the gun to be prepared to fire and to be fired likely had to happen. Now, it sounds like I'm entirely blaming Baldwin. I'm just saying that it simply holding a firearm seldom causes it to go off.
Right, he had to cock it.
Yeah,
and he had to point it.
And yes, there are some damaged firearms that, if you don't cock it all the way back, the hammer flies forward and goes off. Again, then the question is, why is that on set? Why is a damaged or poorly functioning firearm being used? Because I can promise you they're not hard to find, right? Meaning as a prop goes. And so, and it sounds like I'm really making judgments. I'm trying to be careful, as I said.
No, I understand. No,
but
I appreciate
it's
what you're
hugely
saying.
troubling. And I won't lie, I have spent a lot of time thinking about it, and all the things I would have done in that position to make sure it never could have happened. And it's hugely troubling. I won't lie. I'm very concerned what the outcome is going to be, because a number of people who are not being irrational will say we should have no firearms, no blank firing firearms on set. And I'm a huge believer in giving the artist, the actor, as many tools as possible to achieve the best possible product for the audience. And I may be out of step with some other people, but I'm a fan of using blanks, because actors perform differently when they have that moment of ignition. And also remember, I work in theater, and having an audience experience a gunshot when it's proper to the story and the event is profoundly affecting. You can feel.
I shudder to think of all those Sam Peckinpah movies that would never have happened.
Yeah, and
like The Wild Bunch. I mean, of all movies, right, where they shut off like thousands of rounds, and you never hear of anything happening. Here, something terrible happens. Last question.
Sure.
Do you think Baldwin is finished? I mean, there's talk about charges of involuntary manslaughter. Just talk. There's an investigation. We'll see where it goes. But can he recover from this?
So I actually think it really depends on how much people feel for him. You know what I mean? How much sympathy there is for him. We know of other artists who have involuntarily caused the death of a person, be it through a car accident or a boating accident, or and I just don't know how to answer that. As more information comes out, if we perceive that he was an instrument in causing an unnecessary set danger, he'll have trouble recovering from it. If he can convince us, meaning the larger population, the audience, the community, that he is a victim of circumstances, he might be able to walk away. But I find it very hard to imagine this won't be a part of his life and story going forward.
Absolutely. Well, I'm reminded of the Twilight Zone movie in which
with the
Vic
helicopter
Morrow
accident.
was killed. Yeah, the helicopter. And I believe the director, John Landis, it was actually produced by Steven Spielberg and John Landis. They did go on to do other things, but that was certainly a shadow that hung over, that whole scenario and those people for a long time. Very, very sad what happened. He was horrifically killed in that. Anyway, you make a movie and you never know quite what's going to happen. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate this.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope I helped.
You did. Absolutely. You're tremendous. Please come back if we hear more about this story. Daniel Levinson. And we're going to take a brief timeout, commercial break. Back with more on News Talk Saga 960 and the Marc Patrone Show after this.
One, two, three. Nice to be in orbit.